Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Gronewald with Hunter Row Real Estate, and I'm joined by Krista Dunham, which is the author of this amazing book called Table for Two. And I asked her if she would join me today just to discuss her journey through an eating disorder and recovery on the other side. And so her story is amazing. I would encourage anybody to pick up this book because I really it impacted me in a huge way. And so I just feel so privileged, Krista, to be able to sit with you now and just talk to you, because I felt like we talked for the couple days that I read your book, but now I get to talk to your face. And I know there's a lot of people who are going to really appreciate what you have to say. So thanks for being here with me, first off.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about you before I dive into this book and some questions for you?
Yeah, I live with my husband close to Detroit, and we both are counselors. We've gotten really involved in biblical counseling, just through my experience, but just some through the leading of God, just in this direction. It's been a great privilege to be able to help other people as I'm learning and growing myself.
That's awesome. So this book, just for anyone who hasn't read it yet, is a book that you and your husband, David, co-authored together, wrote it from the perspective of biblical counseling background, but also for people who are struggling with an eating disorder and for their spouse's perspective too, which is one I had never heard before. Hearing your husband's perspective of living with you or even in your dating lives before you got married and how this affected the relationship. So I think that was really helpful perspective, because I think those of us who are in it can't see the ripple effect of the people around us. And you speak to that in the book as well. So this is such a unique book that I haven't quite experienced yet in my journey. So one thing you said early on in the book was eating disorders parallel addictive habits or addictive type of personality struggles. So can you share a little bit of how that parallel or comparison is?
Yeah, I think something that I really didn't realize as I was going through it is that some of the eating behaviors can actually change the chemistry of what's going on in your brain, which is the same as what's going on, when you drink alcohol or take drugs, repeatedly to deal with harmful situations in your life. So some of that is going on that I didn't really realize. It also just is a way that you go about coping with things that are going wrong in your life, or just ways that you have learned to deal with things going on in your life. Yeah, an eating disorder is just the same sort of pattern of behavior. And I think just going through it, I noticed some of those links, but coming out of it, and really studying it, I've realized that there are actually more links than I understood as I was going through it.
Yeah, I don't know that. I think what you're seeing when you're in it is very skewed from the reality once you're able to look back, which I think that's the encouraging message, kind of spoiler alert, but an encouraging message that you are on the other side looking back saying, here's what I struggled with. And I mean, at one point you do say that the journey was frustrating, recovery was long, it was hard. It wasn't just a one and done, have this revolutionary thought that changed your way and all of a sudden now it's easy. But what is encouraging is that you are on at least the other side looking back and now helping others who are in a similar spot. So I think that's awesome. The other part that I thought was really interesting was you and your husband talk about the 5 common motives underlying an eating disorder. And the 5, I wrote them down: control, self-medication, appearance, pride, punishment. I don't know that you want to go through all of those, or if you do, but talk a little bit, elaborate on those points, because I think that for some people appearance seems obvious, but maybe not. Control seems obvious to me, but maybe not the self-medication or the pride, how much pride underscores eating disorder, and then punishment. Could you speak to maybe a couple of those?
Yeah. So definitely we talk a lot about the control issue because that was my underlying motive. I went through a car accident, as I mentioned in the book, and I just could feel that lack of control, like that I couldn't control whether I would live or I would die. And as I tried to face life after that, I didn't like that feeling of not being able to control things. And I could see some of those patterns even early on, in my childhood, that I liked things to be exactly so. And that was just the first time in my life where things felt really, really out of my control. But yeah, I think, a lot of people associate the appearance as something that's definitely related to an eating disorder. But like you were saying, there are multiple other motives, and I think one that really stood out to me as I was studying them is pride, because some people don't realize, like, that seems totally off the wall to say that. But there is a sense, and I could feel it too as I was going through it, just I liked that feeling of knowing that I could do something that other people couldn't do. Mm-hmm. And I would look at other people and think, oh, I can make better choices about my food than they are. I would never look like that while I'm eating, or I would, I have much more control than they do. And I would just find a sense of pride in the amount of self-control that I had. And so it is hard to see sometimes, because what you're actually seeing as they're talking or experiencing life is just that they don't like themselves, or they feel a lot of self-confidence issues. But sometimes when you dig down deeper, there's actually, a sense of pride that's in that's saying, well, I can do this, and I can better than other people can. And I think some that I've experienced, as people are talking to me more about what they've been through, because the book does speak a lot to my experience. And I think one thing I would really want to say is just that is my experience. Like, it does not cover what everyone has been through. And I'm finding just people telling me their stories it's heartbreaking, because some people have had terrible things happen to them. And I think that's where some of the other motives come in, like punishment, to think that they deserve something bad because they did something bad, or just some of those work their way in when something bad has happened. And it is heartbreaking, and I don't want to pigeonhole anyone into my exact experience, because there are so many different ones.
And I think on the self-medication motive, that kind of goes alongside the addictive behaviors. Like, you think of alcohol or drugs or whatever, those are medicating coping mechanisms, just like an eating disorder. It's a coping mechanism to survive life or just function on a daily basis. And so this means of control can be a way of, I think you said in the book, like a numbing agent. Food, you eat so much that it numbs you, or you starve yourself so much that you feel in control and you don't, feel the emotion or whatever you're trying to do. I think that can speak to that a little bit. So one thing you said that resonated was you longed for what this eating disorder promised, which was control, acceptance, affirmation, and achievement, yet your heart constantly cried out for an alternative. Mm-hmm. And I think in the body image, healthy living culture we are in, that idea of gaining those feelings of acceptance, control, affirmation, achievement through exercise or food can be a conflicting message, or a confusing one of like, this is a good thing. I want these things and I'm going to try to achieve them. But like you said in the book, your heart was constantly crying out for an alternative. Could you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, I think that I slightly would feel what I was looking for in those behaviors that I was doing. And right. You could catch a glimpse of what they were promising me. Like, I would start to feel in control, or I would start to feel better about myself, but it would always lead down the same path of just right. getting kind of stuck and feeling more controlled by what I was doing than I actually felt like real control. And so I would always feel these moments of, I want out of this, but I don't know how to get out. And I don't see an alternative that would give me even this little bit of control that I feel. So I don't want to let it go, because then I would have what I thought was no control. So if I can just hold on to this little bit, even if it's making me feel awful, then I still want to keep that, because I didn't see another way that was any different.
And like you said, you might have felt a little bit of control or a little bit of affirmation or a little bit of achievement. So you're getting glimpses of it. So just enough to keep you on the cycle of this perpetual habit, compulsion, whatever you want to call it, but not enough to satisfy. But it keeps you going back, which I think is similar to alcohol or drugs or whatever that vice is for you.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you talked about that I wanted you to elaborate on is you said thinking about your particular food rules. That's the chapter you really expounded on food rules, and trying to connect them to your motives can be a productive exercise. So could you give an example of what you mean by that, of the food rule, connecting it to your motives, and how that's helpful in moving towards recovery?
Yeah. So I guess something that I would have connected to control with my food rules was, I always would say, even if I was allowing myself to eat, then I would always say I can never eat all of the plate. Or, and that was maybe even later on in what I was still doing, when I would actually say, okay, I am going to eat, but this is only how much I can. And it would always be that much. And so I think it was helpful to see those rules and say, oh, I can definitely see how I have to control the situation. Or one of the rules, that I had early on was just don't eat out ever, because I could feel that just that lack of control of not knowing exactly where I was going, what I would be eating, and eating in front of people as well was just that lack of control of not knowing what's going to be there, what's going to be around me, who's going to be looking at me. I didn't like that lack of control of the situation. And so I would try to put some of those rules into place that would say, okay, I can have this amount of control in this situation. And so I think that's where I would see that connection for myself.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think the food rules, I mean, we could talk about that for so long, and I want to be careful not to be triggering to people of what your food rules were and what mine are and somebody else's, but maybe doing that exercise of taking a step back and just trying to connect the motive to the food rule. What is the motivation behind it, to see if you can try and break through that food rule and work past it. And I remember maybe it was David in the book just saying that he just didn't understand why going out to eat was such a big deal for you. Picking a restaurant or going to a restaurant or having a meal in public at a public place was just such an enormous emotional stress to you, which I can relate to. And I always say my husband loves when I'm pregnant, because when I'm pregnant, all I want to do is eat out. But when I'm not pregnant, all I want to do is eat at home. Yeah. And so he loves when I'm pregnant, because I'm like, let's go out to eat. For whatever reason, my food aversion is my home kitchen when I'm pregnant. So, but for me, it's very related to, like you said, control. And will they have the foods that I feel safe with? And will I be able to eat enough without people noticing what I'm doing? Because I do weird, all those things that manifest themselves around a meal. So one comment that I love that you made was, God does not value thinness as an ideal. Then we have no right to suggest it is the most important quality to possess. Now, I would say in America or in our culture and wherever, we are constantly bombarded with that message that thinness is an ideal, and it is a standard of living, a standard of even your level of respect is the amount of your ability to maintain thinness. But like you said, God does not value that. Mm-hmm. So why are we constantly pursuing that? And like you said, we have no right to suggest it is the most important quality to possess.
Well, I think that's a problem that we see with a lot of things around us. It's not just an eating problem, it's a living problem. Mm-hmm. So I think I've noticed lately with just the way that I even think that I should be living in relation to other Christians around me, that, oh, it's okay if they're doing it, then I can do that too. Instead of saying, what does the word of God say that I should be doing? How does the Bible say that I should be living, or how I should be eating? Or I think that was important for me to see, was not just can I have someone else tell me how to eat? Because that was one thing, and a nutritionist was very helpful, and I don't want to discount that. That was very helpful along the way. And I think there are certain behavioral things that can be accommodated and helped with, but always in relation to, how does the Bible say that I should be doing this? What should be in my heart as I'm doing this? And then what you're eating doesn't end up mattering as much as how you're eating or what's in your heart as you're eating. And so it's just the same thing as you're choosing how you live your life, how you raise your kids, how, all of that. Just writing this book has helped me with so many areas because of that reason. It's not just how should I eat or what should I eat. It's, how should I live? And that's what the Bible instructs us on.
Yeah. And I just think that was a good reminder of, what am I living based off of, the cultural standard or God's standard? And that's just such a good test of where our hearts are. One thing you said in the book I loved was, I began my destructive eating habits by feeling like I was in control of them. I chose when and when I didn't eat. I was the master of my eating habits. And they were the servants. But as time went on, those lines between master and servant began to blur, which I think is so helpful to think about. Who is in control? Is it us anymore? Or is it the food? Is it the exercise class, or whatever it is? Speak about that line that switched from you being the servant versus the master.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bible tells us, in lots of different ways that, you can become a master or the slave of many different masters. It just depends on what you're choosing, and there really is only one choice. It's between God and the world or Satan, and I think that was eye-opening to me as well, to just know when you're choosing anything that's not God, then it has that power to enslave you in ways that you didn't even know were possible. And so I think just stepping back a lot of times and evaluating your life in general to see, what are my allegiances to? Is it to God? Because if not, then I'm probably serving something else that could easily ensnare me and trap me. And so that's been a good perspective for me to take just on various things. Stepping out of an eating disorder, I think, has helped me evaluate so many different things in my life and understand there really is only one true master, and that's God. And if you're choosing something else, you're going to get ensnared by it.
Yeah. Gosh, such a good perspective to remember. And just to ask that question, am I a slave or am I master in this situation, whatever it is? And I think you could apply that to when you see something that triggers you, or when you're feeling anxiety about what you think you have to do in a moment, to think, am I slave or am I master in this situation? So I think that's really helpful. You'd said that eating disorders set up unrealistic life systems that always produces failure, because our bodies were never meant to operate in that way. I could never arrive at the perfection that my eating disorder dictated. And I think that is an interesting thing, because it's like you're always going for the next ideal. And I remember that at one season, it was like, just a few more pounds, I'll be happy, I'll be done with this, I'll put it aside and I'm going to move on. And then it's like you get there and it's like, well, what's a few more? And it's the eating disorder never relents. It's constantly asking for more, and it will never be satisfied. It sounds like that was your experience too.
Yeah, it definitely was. So I feel like, like I said, our bodies were not made to operate in that way. And I think that was important for me to realize, was that God made food and God made our bodies, and he made them to work in a certain way. And so when we're trying to take over and control in a way that we weren't meant to, it's always going to fail. Our bodies are always going to cry out and say, hey, this isn't the way I'm supposed to work. Either give me more food, or our bodies are going to start breaking down. Because we haven't fueled them properly. There are just so many physical ailments that at the time could be attributed to my eating disorder. And even now I physically struggle with things that probably won't completely be well because of the way I treated my body. And those are consequences for doing that. And just like we were talking about, it's just our bodies were made a certain way, and food was made, to nourish our bodies. And when we treat it in the wrong way, then there are going to be problems.
Right. Consequences of those. It's never God punishing, but it's consequence of those choices, and that the body was never designed that way. And so when you take a really beautifully designed thing like the body and disrupt it goes into starvation mode, or just your body yearning for things. And I think that's what makes sense of like why so fearful that I cannot be alone with food because I don't trust myself. Because it's like, well, if you take anybody and you starve them, they now become over aware of food, and now they want it, just like any diet. Now I'm not, cut out sugar. Now I want sugar more than I've ever wanted it, because now it's been eliminated. So it makes sense. And if you just gave your body what it wanted on a regular basis, filling it to full and nourishing it as it needs, we probably wouldn't feel this crazy, erratic, out of control sensation around food, because we're like, I don't trust myself. Well, who would when you've robbed it of so many things it needs?
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines in the whole book, and I read this to a support group that I have that we work together through this. I read it to them and just was like, this is the most beautiful thing, is when you said, most nights we sit down to dinner and neither of us thinks about the way things used to be. We don't think about the anxiety, the tears, the arguments, or the deception. We sit with our 3 beautiful children, thank God for the food before us, and then we all simply eat. And it still gives me goosebumps to just think about that, because that's not quite the experience I have, and probably for a lot of people out there, even people who've never been, let's say, diagnosed with an eating disorder, but they come to the table with lots of anxiety, lots of pressure, lots of expectations, lots of morality of like, depending on what I eat or how much I eat in this meal will determine my goodness for the day, like all of those things. And I love that. Would you say that that's the vast majority of your time, is that you come to the table and that those things are behind you and you simply eat?
Yeah. I mean, I think I tell people that, I use the words recovery, victory, freedom, things like that. And I would, for the most part, say that's the majority of my time. Like, I can go to church dinners, and there are times that I think about it, but it's in a way of thinking, praise God that I can do this. Like,
Awesome.
when I wasn't able to before. But I mean, I don't want to paint a picture like I do not struggle anymore, ever. I think I even say this in the book, that it's the sin that's going to be in the background of my heart. It's just something that I do have to think about, but it's in a way that says, I now know what triggers me to do that. I know what I have been deceived to do, and I can make choices based on that, and say, I'm not going to run to food when I'm upset. I'm going to call the person that I've designated to call, or I'm going to talk about my feelings, or I'm going to, read the Bible, and I'm going to, know that God really hears me when I'm saying things that hurt, and know that Christ suffered, so that I can know that my suffering does actually matter. It's not senseless, and he took care of my sin, and I don't have to feel guilty anymore for that. So I'm not paying for anything. There's just so much that has been let go. But like I said, I have to know that it could be, lurking around corners in my heart, and I have to be on guard, just like anybody has to for anything that they struggle with, to know this is what I'm capable of, and to think that I could never do it again is naive. And but to know the kind of victory that Christ has won on my behalf, I can now say it is possible. I can have victory. And where before I would have said, this looks so bleak. It looks so hopeless to me. So yeah, I would say that is, 99% of the meals that I eat are now eaten, not even really thinking about those choices that I have to make. I do just eat.
That's awesome. But I think that's wise to know. That doesn't mean that you couldn't ever be tempted back there. I mean, God has the power to completely free you of this for the rest of your life, but there's also the possibility of being tempted back there. So not being naive or wishful thinking and not being wise to protect yourself and being on guard to those things and having accountability. And is this victory or freedom been a few years at this point? I don't remember the timeline of about how long you've had that.
I think, we said in the book it was like a decade-long struggle, but it is hard to determine because it's it's more like a stair step kind of thing where I'd see growth and I'd, experience this much of feeling better and things build on top of each other. And so I do feel like it really hasn't been, it's maybe been, 5 or more years that I've really felt like this is definitely, for the most part past me. I think within the last, couple of years, there was one time I really felt I'm experiencing a lot of stress. I can feel myself, headed back in that direction. But I was able to, like I said, I knew who to call. I knew what to do. And so I wasn't ready just to slip right back into it. I had a safety net there that was ready. And I think there was a lot I still had to learn within the past 5 years that just really helped solidify that safety net to feel like I'm okay now, that I think I would have considered myself. I'm eating better. I'm not worried as much about food, but I didn't quite have that safety net in place. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the last piece of the puzzle that really helped. After we moved where we are now, I really got involved with biblical counseling and have a biblical counselor now that I can call and talk to. And I know that she is there for me, and she's provided me with a lot of information that was really helpful for me to just get that major safety net in place.
I think that's smart and wise. It's similar, just having this support group. I have 3 girls who have similar stories, all of us in different places of our journey of recovery, and we can just speak the language of one another and challenge each other, hold each other accountable. So I think that's super helpful. There's one part of the book that I don't know that I can summarize, so I'm just going to read part of it and then let you elaborate on it, but it was really helpful. You said, habits are powerful and they increase their hold on us when they are utilized as coping mechanisms. So habits are powerful and the hold that they have on us are even higher when we use them to cope for whatever reason. We're using them as a coping mechanism. And then you said the process of breaking a habit is complicated by the fact that our repeated indulgence in a routine actually nurtures our love for it. And then you talk about James K.A. Smith speaks of our rituals and practices as training our desires. What I do is, of course, already an indicator of what I love, but the repeated practice further encourages that love. So while obsessively working out at the gym reveals my desire for a slim and fit body, the more I work out instead of resting or going to dinner with friends, the more I reinforce that value. With every run on the treadmill, I am training my heart to believe that a slim and fit body is the most important thing. It will not be enough then simply to stop going to the gym. I will have to develop new habits that point my heart towards new values. And I think that was eye-opening to the thought of, I have years of standing in front of a mirror teaching at an aerobics class at a gym or working out in a gym and just reinforcing the message that I believe, which is a lie, that there's nothing at the end of that promise that I'm going to have what I'm hoping I'm going to create by spending hours and hours and hours at the gym. But the thought of that, we're just reinforcing it with every run, every class, every time we go. And the thought of that, we're just training our desires with each activity we do like that. Do you want to elaborate any more, speak on where that came from for you?
Well, I think it can seem discouraging, I think, to look at that and think, that was such a long time of doing those things.
Yeah.
Like, but I think the helpful thing to think of in that situation is to know that you can make a change, because otherwise I think some aspects of looking at an eating disorder is, well, it just happened to you. It's just something that it's a disease of the brain, or it's something, just the sort of disease model makes it seem like it's just come on you and there's nothing you can do about it. But to know that every step that you take towards changing that that thinking and that behavior is actually doing something. It's making a change. I think that can be encouraging if you think of it in the right direction. Because I think where I often struggled was that I was ready to give up if something didn't change right that first time. That if I did the right thing the next day, why wasn't my eating disorder just gone? But to think of that balance of, well, I have trained myself to do this. I have trained my brain to think this way. And sometimes how we explain it, you can actually picture the pathways that have formed, in your brain along that way. And, or like, if taking a walk in the woods, if you walk the same way every single time, it's going to make a path. And just to think how many times you have to stay off of that path for, the growth to come back in over that path. It is a long time, but to know every time you make that choice, something is happening. It's just not happening all the way, and right away. It's just every time you do make that choice, you can, picture a little bit of growth happening every time, and to know that there is something that you are able to do. It's not just happening to you.
Right. And you said too that the values that drive an eating disorder impact a whole life, not just the dinner table, which I think we've made crystal clear in just talking about this. Like, you might start off thinking this is just me controlling one meal, or me controlling some, wanting to lose some weight, or I want to be healthy for exercise. But that can quickly progress into something much deeper, where you see, like you talked about in the book, isolation from friends, not doing the hobbies that you once loved to do, like not going to meet friends for dinner because you don't want to be put in that situation that becomes more stressful. And just the things that you used to love become now threats to an eating disorder. I think about that for me specifically. Just traveling is so anxiety producing. It requires so much effort and energy that I have to really, really want to do it, because the mental activity and the emotional activity of thinking through all the things I won't be able to control when we're traveling, and all of the unknowns of, will I be able to exercise? Will I be able to eat what I feel safe eating? All of those things. Traveling can just be emotionally exhausting, to the point where I'm just like, I'm okay to never travel again. Whereas I'm married to a man who loves adventure. So I'm just really squelching that desire for him, and something for me that would be a fun activity if I didn't have this master that I'm serving. So another thing you talked about is, you said eating disorders attack relationships, mental faculties, specifically discernment, self-assessment, concepts of beauty, and communication practices. So just going beyond, this isn't just the dinner table. This is well beyond that, into all these other facets. Do you want to give an example of any of that, or just anything you've seen in regards to this going beyond just controlling food or exercise?
Well, I think the big thing that I thought of while you were talking was when I transferred schools when I was in college, just right after I really started some of the eating disorder behaviors. And I don't really have any friends from that time period of my life. And sometimes it breaks my heart, to say there was this whole chunk of what was supposed to be a really great time of my life. My college years are just supposed to be fun, spending time with friends, making new friends, all of this stuff. And I look back and I have no friends on Facebook from that second school that I transferred to. And like I said, it just kind of breaks my heart. But at the same time, I have chosen to use that as a way to remind myself, this is what's possible when you make these kind of choices. And to know like I was talking about earlier, to know that that could be in the background of my heart. I don't want that to happen again. I don't want to be so lonely. I don't want to be so isolated. So to know that that is a real possibility, to have friends completely removed from my life because of making choices about my food, that's not somewhere that I want to go back to.
Yeah.
So while it, I have regrets about it, it's God has used it to show me, you don't want to go back there. Like, that's a wasteland. Don't go back there. And so I think that's just a good, touch point of like reminding me, don't go back there. That's really a bad choice.
I can definitely relate to that too. Just seasons of, man, seeing friend groups that I was a part of, but wasn't because I was removing and isolating, to where they're still friends and do life together. And I'm not part of that because I chose to want control, isolate, and live in fear versus embracing those relationships. So I see that, like you said, I think what's really good is not to sit in shame of like, man, look what I missed out on, but a reminder of, I don't want that. And I don't want to go back there. So make choices today to choose people, choose relationship, choose life versus the death that ultimately this type of behavior brings us to. You said that eating disorders tend to divert attention away from so many productive activities. One specifically, you were just saying hobbies that you used to find lots of meaning from become joyless. But productive activities, I would assume, and this wasn't necessarily the case for me, but just where people can get to a place where they're not able to function as well at work. They're so foggy because they're not getting enough nourishment that they can't finish a task, or just lots of mistakes, or disrupting their work pattern because they're feeling anxiety because they did eat. Now they feel like they need to exercise, purge by going to the gym, whatever. I'm sure you've seen lots of those types of things happen as well.
Yeah. So I think just for me, it's another area, of course, that I do have somewhat of regret about, just thinking, how could I have spent my time better, like building up my, my writing, or things that I experience now that I just think, how much better could that have been, but to also think, another way of just thinking, I don't want to go back there, like to be able to move past that and find joy in the things that God has given you to do, the abilities, is just far more rewarding than anything that you think that you could get out of eating disorder behavior. And some of that was just like coping with perfectionism, like, and being able to view some of my gifts as what they were, like gifts from God to God. Like, I need to use them. They are not mine. So to worry so much about perfecting them and then forcing myself into habits like that just to deal with that I'm not the best that I could be, like, isn't using those abilities as God intended them to. It's just, it's burying things, instead of using them to glorify Him. And so I think that was, a good thing that I need to really think about, was just, how can I use these actually to glorify God? And it was actually one of my, I've been through quite a bit of physical therapy because of some of the things I've done to my body. And one of my physical therapists was a Christian, and she told me, you need to take care of your body so that you can do what God has for you to do. And it was so convicting because I was like, I feel like I should know that already. But I wasn't doing it. Like, it's why I would end up back there all the time, was just, so just to think through, how can I better glorify God with my body, instead of thinking, how can I perfect my body so that I like it the way that it is? Because that's not what we're made for. We're meant to glorify Him and serve Him. And so when we get off track with that and start thinking, what do I want to do with my body? How do I want it to look? Then we can really sink into those types of behaviors too.
Yeah, so true. Along that lines, you said we become more enamored with what food, our waistline, or our sense of control can do for us than we are enamored with God. So it's like the shift of focus. And you elaborate on that in the book, just like there's got to be a better love that we chase versus this loveless love that we're trying to chase, which is body image or control or beauty, whatever it is. it's like we've got to go back to our first love, which is Christ, and pursue that so that he is getting the glory for the way he made us. And some of these things that we use to keep us in an eating disorder were designed, like you said, for his glory, but we're using it for ours. How can we use this gift of self-discipline for God versus ourselves, that just brings pride instead of bringing humility from us. So you say in the book that you have 3 children. I think that's one of the biggest fears I might have with this is just that I have 2 little girls, one that's 1 and one that's 5. And my 5-year-old definitely makes comments about what I'm eating, what I'm not eating. And I think that is my one question for you is how have you protected your kids from this being something they see? Again, we don't want the deception, but at the same time, like I would not say I'm free. So they're going to see this behavior, even if I'm fighting for freedom. How do we protect our kids from falling into these same patterns or just being honest with them about it?
Yeah, I think I was made really aware of that as we finished this book, and it's like laying around on the coffee table, and like we're having to, like we got a big box of them in the mail. Like, my kids are definitely seeing, and I hadn't really shared with my daughter yet, who is now 14. At the time we got the contract, she was 12. So she's just really entering that stage of, am I ready to talk to her? And so writing this book kind of sort of forced me out into that when I probably would have done it anyways at the time, but it was like, it was just sort of a good opportunity for me to do it because it was right there. And so we have talked quite a bit more about it because of the book. But I think just things that I've done along the way are just, we don't talk about diets. We don't go on diets,
Right.
we talk about the things, we were just talking about of like glorifying God with our bodies. And we talk about how, maybe junk food isn't the best way to nourish our bodies, but also getting too wrapped up in not eating junk food is also not great. So, we shouldn't overdo sugar just because it's not because of what it will do to our bodies or our weight, but just that it's not the best way for our bodies to function. We get tired. So I talked to her some about that of, how do these foods make your body feel? And how do they help you to, perform the actions that you need to perform? Like, if you want to do sports, if you want to, even sing in the praise band at church, think through what you're putting in your body. So, before you're singing, you got to drink a lot more water, or, the same for running. Just so being more aware of those things, of just thinking of our bodies and food as just our, receiving fuel, has been really important. And then just, I think being as honest as I can with her and just being aware of what she's ready to hear. And I don't need to share everything with her. And I realize now with, the book being out there available, like she could very well read it. But I think we have, on top of all of that, just developed a relationship where I feel like she can talk to me about a lot of things. And so that's even important, no matter what issue you're dealing with, is just to create a situation where, she came to me with something last night where she just was automatically assuming, oh, I've done something really wrong. I'm going to be punished for this. And there was so much where I just needed her to know, like, she's not condemned because of what Christ has done. Like, God doesn't condemn her. And I definitely don't condemn her. Like, God is the judge. And just being able to talk openly about how all of that works, it just really plays into, some of these scenarios, so that it's not just about food or dieting or all of that. It's about glorifying God, what Christ has done for us, and how we play into that whole scenario. It's just very important when it comes to this particular issue, but really any issue that they might deal with, because it may not be eating, it may be for her something entirely different, but to set the stage, you kind of go the same direction.
I always worry that I might overcompensate because I'm so nervous that she would go down the same path, and I don't want her to so badly, to the point where she just wants a Barbie so bad and wants it. And I just said, Ellie, I just don't want you to have a Barbie. She's like, why, Mom? And I said, well, and again, she's 4 at the time. And I said, because a Barbie's body doesn't look like a real person's body. It's not made the way our bodies were made. And I don't want you to ever think that that's the way your body should look. Do you understand? She's like, no, I don't understand at all, Mom. I was like, okay, we'll talk about it at another time, but I'll find you another doll.
Yeah.
Which I did. So it's like, she's probably too young to understand that, but it's like, I really want the culture message is going to be so loud to our kids that I just want to interrupt it and let her at least start thinking for herself. And then the other thing is like, I just really don't like red dye 40 in food. I just really don't like it for my kids specifically. And it seems like every time they get something from school or wherever, it's got red dye 40. And so the other friends brought over some popsicles with it in it, and we kept them. And she said, Mom, can I have the red dye 40 popsicles, please? And I'm like, gosh, you're killing me. So it is like, I mean, part of me, like when we first had her, I was so rigid, just like I was with myself with her diet. And I remember having like a scary food for the first time, and I did it with her. I was like, I'm going to let her have it for the first time, and I'm going to have it. And it was helpful to me to have her sitting there having no morality to the food. It was just, I'm going to try this new food and doing it with her. And it was like a freeing thing. And my husband has a lot more freedom in this area. So he's such a good balance, which it sounds like David too. So just for our kids to see our spouses handle food with an open hand and with freedom, I think is really helpful. So thank you for just sharing this. I know it's a vulnerable topic. So for you to open up and write this, I want you to know specifically, it's been very helpful to me. So I know lots of people have felt the same thing. It was just like through the whole thing. Yes, me too. Me too. I agree. So having someone else put it out there just to give hope to us too, that there can be freedom from this is so encouraging. So I thank you for that. What are the best ways for people to connect with you? I mean, definitely for them to go out and grab this book, Table for Two, but any other ways they can be in touch?
Well, I'm on Instagram. I really am notorious for not really being as involved with social media, so I might be a little harder to find, but I specifically, am on Instagram, Krista _Dunham, and I don't mind for people to come and find me. I'm on Facebook too. You can find me, and I've had people send me messages, and I don't mind that at all. I've interacted with people on Facebook, so either of those, are fine. And I am working on, getting more of my stuff out there with a website, but it hasn't happened yet, just with the life with kids and all that stuff.
So to come, we'll look forward to that. Well, thank you again for your time, and I hope we can chat again soon. But thank you again for writing this book and for sharing your heart with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. I'll see everybody next week.